Hello, this is the Harboring Light. Hello and welcome. This is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative take about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out to me. 2 ways you can do this is first through email and then again through YouTube. I appreciate all you listeners out there and all the international listeners. Oh, that's really a testament to what I'm trying to do here. I appreciate that. That's really something else. I appreciate all your American feedback, American listeners, on my U.S. territory, brothers and sisters out there. But the international reach, oh my, thank you to extend that global reach. Thank you. It's very humbling. It's amazing. All right, so I can't stress enough with the importance of word of mouth here. So, if you feel the fancy to say, hey, have you ever heard of the Harboring Light? Let me just type it on in. Give it a shot. I would greatly appreciate that. All right, so on to the topic for choice here. Okay, so as I said, that this is a series. So the final part of the series will be, towards the end of this month. And I'm gonna focus in on the book as I mentioned on Monday, but I will reiterate this until I get to the end of the month. It's focused in on American Advertisement 200 years, right? That's what the title of the book. So leading up to this, I'm gonna talk about brand and brand culture. So this time, the brand culture that I'm going to focus in on is Abercrombie and Fitch. Here we go. Okay, so Abercrombie and Fitch. That is all in the culture of controversy. Specifically, controversy where sex sells. But in this case, highly inappropriate means of saying this. Because at the end of the day, and that's why Jeffries, the guy who took over Abercrombie and Fitch in the 90s, he made that strategic marketing method to do so. I'll get into that more depth about this, as in the progression of this show. Made that decision. It's one thing to be, the sex sells but be appropriate with it. And the problem is, and the backlash with it was that, especially with Abercrombie and Fitch, it focused on teenagers. Now, look, even though you want to say, oh, yeah, well, they're 16, 17, whatever. Look, they're teenage kids. They're kids, okay? You don't have overt sexual imagery with that. That's one. And then the other thing with it is the whole, practice of the aspects of, body image and exclusion with body image, which is quite interesting. Hold on, just while I have this on my mind here, let me say something. Let me pull this up. Just a minute. Just a minute. Okay, so yeah, well, I'm not mistaken. Okay, so all right, so here's the thing with it now, because I recall this here. Okay, so hey, remember what I said about exclusion with body image. Now, when I was growing up, when my husband and I were growing up, Abercrombie and Fitch was all about it was particular body size types. You have to be really fit. You have really fit, trim, Model S type, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with that. And then there's something, that can be aspirational. But the problem is, where do you drawing the line between the aspects of being, the with sexuality, where you're crossing the line with that. Now, they say that the Abercrombie, in which I was finding the facts about this, is that you got to look at it from this way. So, Abercrombie and Fitch is typically supposed to be for, the college crowd. So, which is supposed to be in realms or in the wheelhouse of, they're in college, so it's appropriate to showcase, but again, listen, in which it stopped in 2003 with the catalog, when it was overtly like nude, models there, where what are you doing? Like, that's still crossing the line, where it's just one of those things where you are calling, oh, my innocence, but what your target audience is. That teenagers, primarily visit Abercrombie and Fitch before Hollister was a thing. This, so you can't call that, just call it for what it is. You're being, it's pedophilic. It's weird. Like, what are you doing? And so, Jeffries, or whatever his name is, that Jeffries, I'll tie that in. That's why it's a whole different, other culture within the culture. So, you got the Hollister, and then you have the Abercrombie and Fitch kid. So, Hollister is supposed to be typically just teen-centric. And then, it's self-explanatory with Abercrombie and Fitch kids. It's supposed to be for kids. But at the same time, Hollister is more tame, like where it's all about the Californian surf mentality, versus the Abercrombie kid is supposed to be, the kind of, it's supposed to be the more stylish kid. But the overall tie between Abercrombie and Fitch, Hollister, and Abercrombie and kids is all supposed to innate, hey, these are cool kids. They know where it's at. They have their pulse on the line here, on their finger on the line here. So that within itself cultivates a whole culture with how brands can do this, and the power of brands. Even though sometimes the argument is that where brands don't really mean that much when it comes to culture, when I would say that brands create the culture. So what do I mean by this? Okay, think about it like this. So Calvin Klein did this at its find it is best. I don't particularly agree with it, but the Calvin Klein really ran that in the ground. And see, with this whole thing, we're really crossing the line with inappropriateness. It was there, unfortunately. So, case in point is this. For a certain generation knows about this, but for those who don't, or those who are younger, or what have you, I only know this because this, I appreciate history, but because those who don't, even though you're young, but you still know things because you appreciate history. Here it goes. So back in the early 80s, there was a ad that ran with Brooke Shields. Keep in mind, if I'm not mistaken, she was about 15, okay? 15 or 16. She was underage. And it was whole thing of this innuendo of nothing comes in between me and my Calvin Kleins. So it's overtly sexual. You see her thrusting it around. You see, even in the editorial, which means, y'all know what editorial is. Y'all know what that means. Okay, I don't, like I said, I'm not in the business of over explaining. If you want more facts, or, you can always shoot me an email or make comments. Feel free. All right. So, showing her, being overtly sexual, and going on the whole adage that, sex sells. And that in itself cultivated a whole type of look of the power of youth and sexuality. What does that interplay in fashion, or how does that enter? And then also, what does that lead into the mentality about youth and sexuality in the 80s? That was a forerunner of it, right? And then it leads to what you know today and what you think about today with Calvin Klein. The aspects of, you're going to see, well, that's the whole thing with different generations. It led to the 90s where, when you associate big buff guys, the Marky Mark Wahlbergs of the world, being, tidy whitey saying, hey, look at me and myself and my Calvin Kleins, like, and the Adonis looking type of chiseled good looks associated with the brand. And so that's how you got in the wheelhouse of what you see with Abercrombie and Fitch. Now keep in mind, Abercrombie and Fitch, it got its start with just simply being a sporting goods, or something like LL Bean, maybe you could say, but a little bit more than that. You could say a sporting goods brand, and with Abercrombie. And then Fitch came along because he was, a proprietor. He really liked the brand. He wanted to do something different with it. And they just focused in on the aspects of the sophisticated man. Like, having a brand that encapsulates that exudes that panache, that sort of worldly man. Yeah, I would equate that to like in a later part of the 2000s to the 2010s, where the Secchi's ads, right? And he's sitting around. He's very sophisticated. He's an older man, but he's very sophisticated. But you can tell he's a man's man, for the most part. You can tell that he is that. And that's what the image, and there's a whole culture behind that. And to the point of Hemingway, which embody that spirit of the worldly sophisticated male. That's what it was. And then, so, in the 90s, Jeffrey's coming along and said, well, squash all that. Let's do this thing. Let's refocus in on this thing. Let's market brand, tweak this stuff up here. Roll the dice. Boom! Guess what? We're going to sell the whole thing. Sex sells. But we're going to be I'm going to make it overtly controversial, because I'm going to just do that because Calvin Klein has success with it. But it's just one of those things where, guy, read the room. Like, guy, don't have it to where, it's appropriate. You ever thought of that? I mean, do that. So, what is my take about all these things here? So, okay, so I will reiterate and I will stress that I actually like ads. And here's why. I like ads because they are a footmark or a footstool, or they are a glimpse into history or a glimpse into the future. And they showcase what is in itself what was valuable at the time. And so that is something to be said about that when you look at Western culture, primarily, and in it itself, with the aspects of how valuable product advertising, free market goes hand in hand. Because if you don't have a strong brand, first, you're not going to get that foot in the door. But then, if the quality is crappy, that's a whole nother story. So, that's what was very interesting. And that's what is very interesting about the aspects of Abercrombie and Fitch, the whole wheelhouse with that, and other, brands that came along, like trying to emulate that. Willing to buy into the less than okay quality just because it what is a social mark of who you are. And I would say Abercrombie & Fitch really did that. The Jeffries guy knew how to turn and spin, and you knew the cultivation and the power of image to sell something, but to do that so you get the foot in the door, but we're selling you not that bad good of a material. We're selling, and then you start to think, well, maybe we're just selling a lifestyle here. And see, that's the whole thing too with marketing and advertising, what I find quite interesting. Most of the time with marketing, it centers itself around with the good times, happiness, selling a dream. And that's what's so very interesting, too, when you think about, brands like Abercrombie and Fitch and all these things. They were the forerunner, for the most part, the forerunner of what you selling in a lifestyle, what you see today with the Instagram deals, and it's all about that. What the pretending, yeah, you are something, or selling that you are something, but also being very exclusive with the aspects of what I said when my husband and I were growing up. They had the size, as far as size, it's very limited. You had to be on your game with your body. You really did. So, me personally, I think that, hey man, to each his own, but I think there's nothing wrong with wanting to be disciplined and wanting to have a good body, and then when you fall off and you say, you get out of shape, you reel yourself back in and just get back in and get yourself toned or get yourself healthy. But there's one thing it's very interesting too about cultivating your body, building your body, having a nice lean body or muscular body or something, versus the extreme of what we see, being extremely thin or being morbidly obese. There's no in between, where that's like, and there's something to be said with a person who really develops their body and makes it uniquely their own. And some can say, well, there's variation using outliers. Well, there's variations, Mary. But, there's a universal facts of what's attractive and what's not. I mean, there's always that layer to look at, to kind of squash that. But, I digress. Okay, so going on to some more of my thoughts here. Personally, I remember going, when I was about, I was 17. It was one year after Christmas, right? When my mother, she got me like a hoodie or something, and so she wanted to either get it like it was one of those things where getting see if you could get it another one, or getting it a lower price, or something was going on like that, right? So we both go into the store, and there was a line out, sort of. It was really, and see, at that time, that was when it was like, club music, boom, 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 loud everywhere, bombastic. I mean, you just undeniable. Oh, and then you get overpowered with the perfume smell or cologne smell of it, just hitting your face here. But it was very noticeable, the sort of environment that was there. Very good looking people, but at the same time, there was a lot of overtone aspects of a lot of pressure to do things a certain way, to where it kind of seems like, it was off-putting at times. And then I also remember, my friends telling me about this whole thing, and also making this joke, which also is quite interesting, the double standard of this crap. So how's it okay for, oh, look at me, I'm this girl, I'm gonna sit. I mean, that's what they're paid to do that, but at the same time, that just because they are, which is funny because, the same argument can be flipped when that argument is addressed towards a woman. It's different, but for a man, he should be lucky that he is being adored like this. I mean, why not? That's what he's there for. Look, women are like, yes, how they say now, that's getting faded out, but some still in certain circles, they say this yes queen stuff, whatever. Anyway, asserting that and saying, taking it as a personal challenge to see who can be more appropriately sitting on the male model, a girl sitting on the male model, we're just, half naked, just that and with jeans, and it's like, and then also on top of that, teenage girls doing this. It's like, you can see where, hey man, come on. And so, and then also it makes a lot of sense with the backlash with parents saying, hey man, this is getting way too on the hand. We gotta put the rails on this. We gotta do something. And so that in itself is also another testament to the aspect of how very important and how influential brands can be on our culture. It can really shape in which the way we think and we view and process ourselves within it. And I think that Abercrombie and Fitch was a good case study for that. And me personally, also, I saw it personally, so, I can equate for that. Yeah, that is true. It's not just hogwash or something you just made up or it's hyperbolic. Yes, it was really insanity, It was crazy. So, that's my take about it. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to get into break down some of the facts for you here. So, let me see. Sorry, before I lose my train of thought. So what I said earlier about, and then what I've just said about limited sizes, they were, I guess, deemed have to have inclusive sizes, right? But how is it? It's quite funny when the 2020s came along. They had plus size figures for Abercrombie and Fitch, but moving the goalposts and being morbidly obese and saying, and then having themselves being sexualized and saying, look at this looks good. Yeah. No. See, that's where, the realms of reality needs to be put in check. See, that's the problem with what I said on Monday, the whole thing with not having respect for the brand, good or bad, not having respect for the brand. And that's why Victoria's Secret failed so miserably, and they had to regroup and say, hey, the traditional way in which we used to do business, let's get back to that. Because this ain't selling with there's some big broad walking down here, or having some masculine looking person walking down the runway, and supposed to be in lingerie and being alluring. No, that's not what the image is. And it's just one of those things where, where does it go with the respect, too, of the brand quality? Because that within itself is showing the loyalty. And then when it's showcased that there's no loyalty there, that also builds a cultivation of the power and getting rid of that culture for something better. All right, so moving on here. Let me get back to the facts here. All right, so now I'll have sources linked for you. So says Abercrombie and Fitch. I'm gonna just give this, a specific rundown. And then if y'all want to read more, feel free. I'll have the source link for you. Okay, Abercrombie and Fitch is an American retail company founded in 1892. Originally specializing in high-end sporting goods and menswear. Alright, so over the years, it evolved into brand targeting teenagers, particularly in the 90s. Now, might Jeffries is the one specifically targeting teenagers. So I guess he had this mentality of, before with Calvin Klein, or the impact of the way, maybe he was trying to do this with the Bennington or Bennington. I'm gonna talk about that next week with the whole. We're targeting, because that's how they got their bread and butter, which they eventually phased out. With controversial images sell, but we're targeting youth, and maybe he was trying to bridge the gap with that. And there's something to be said about that too. All right, so over the years, it involved brand targeting teenagers, particularly in the 90s. Like I said, with implementing aggressive marketing strategies when he took over in the 90s, and for being sexualized and discriminatory hiring practices. So the company expanded, as I said, about Hollister and Kidd, and the Hollister, which specifically is that California-ness, or surf mentality that you get. That's what you fun in the sun. That's supposed to be the teenage, just all teenage, and that's more appropriate. And then you get the Abercrombie and Kids, but faced discriminating sales by the early 2000s due to the changing consumer preferences and the competition for other retailers. So following the years of controversy, including public backlash over racially insensitive products and hiring practices, Jeffrey stepped down in 2014. And also, in this, it says they tried to revitalize itself with the image A&F, with having a resurgence, which I tried to find images of it, but I couldn't. But it probably did so bad, and that's probably the reason why I can't find anything. Let me see. Where? Troy's more. Let me, for generation, researching generation, Z, which is the whole inclusivity, looking fat looks good or whatever. So it's quite interesting. I wanted to mention this. So in 2004, Jeffries launched the Ruler number 925. It's quite interesting because the Ruler 925, and then keep in mind the year 2004, because that was a year after when the lookbook and the catalog stopped, specifically in the catalogs, and stopped in 2003, because that was when the catalogs were really controversial, because they were showcasing nude models that were teenage models. So he tried to rephrase. It's quite interesting. A year later, he tried to rephrase by Rula, and so this was supposed to be, the crowd, where it's post grad, and it's supposed to be a brick and mortar store, and it's supposed to, encapsule a certain image in your life, where Greenwich Village, and for some reason, Greenwich Village is supposed to be the place in which, people in their 20s or after they get out of college flock to find themselves or something, or that bohemian chic lifestyle. And, it's quite interesting too, and I'm gonna give my thoughts on that in more the detail, where when brands fail pretty bad, really bad, because of controversial doing, stupid stuff, and they try to save face, like this is a really good example of that. They try to save face, say, hey, look, we learned our lesson. Look, we're gonna do this. This PR, the look more appealing from a PR point of view, when they're just doing this just to get their money back. They want to keep the business going. And it's quite interesting that this ruler number 25 came out. All right, so what? And there was another brand, rebranding themselves YPB, your personal best, in 2022. That was supposed to be the aspects of getting Gen Zers into liking Abercrombie and Fitch by doing this all-inclusive thing, where it bombed because nobody really wants to see that with overweight people saying how looking without a shirt on. Especially, it's quite interesting how that take goes with a man without a shirt on is overweight, but more accepting with a woman, having some, even in not so much with that. And still they'll say it's funny how that goes, because these type of women, they say, oh, yes, you look, accept me for who I am, or this, that, and the other third, or yes, you look good, even though the whole equate that with a Lizzo body type. Oh, she's beautiful. But if you say, oh, you look like Lizzo, well, you kind of, it'll give you the stare of death. So do you really mean that? There's something to be said about that. So, that didn't do quite well, because that's going against what the image originally looks like. You see, trying to reconnect with Gen Zers, where at the end of the day, that's a good case study in the lesson of, okay, don't alienate the customers with the money who actually will have the buying power to do so. Because most of the time, when you think about it, sorry to say, this is not always the case. Even though I'm a millennial, I don't act or think that way. It just happened to be bestowed upon me. And you can say this for a lot, but for the most part, most of the time, unfortunately, with the mentality that's being enabled, or who they think they're addressing, those type of people, they don't want to be focused enough to have any real sustainable income enough that they can just spend. It's not there. And so they're gonna hemorrhage money because they can't afford that kind of stuff. It's just not there. So there's something to be said about that. All right, so there's that. Okay, so I would like to greatly know, this reaches the end, I would like to greatly know what you all think. Feel free to get the conversation, extend the conversation. And you can, like I said, 2 ways. Email is what more immediate, and then YouTube, fill up comments. Okay, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. Bye-bye for now.